also like the students right now have for like electricity and like the hospital of like the students like the woman to be and like raising like into the like certainly and the bring in like the second pillar and also bring for like in scenario to be like the second as well as like the third pillar and just going like unlike in like the first pillar there won't be any phone at all. It's like there is a scenario that I'm also like so that just mean that the second pillar that once that the candidate makes it to like the top of that the second thing that like at that point that them getting that stuff right and at that point like them realizing that basically there is no fall point of that the second as well as like the third is like in the scenario that I'm looking for. So at that point I'm looking like the scenario being that at first like I'm looking for once like the time of the beginning for like the second pillar like different at that point I'm for like them initially them saying that there is like this game and there is like the different like company that is going to like separate like from like it's like the scenario that I'm looking for. So like initially like them trying to like his of time that trying to like convince Sanjon to like separate himself from the community and Sanjon doesn't even really agreeing to it. So like initially I'm just trying like that the scenario to be like most likely is that old men should be engaged most likely which you already having that hand that kind of like an occasion with the connecting to that sound of due to that sound of like the way sound have played like the range of singers and everything. So definitely I was going like it being like the old man being ended at that point that the narration would be telling the Indigo guy as well as like that speaking candidate to like basically to totally at that point like him the three of them him basically threatening Sanjon that basically if Sanjon was a separate hotel, like then that they would be targeting Sanjon along the line that the whole bunch of Indian right and like that point that Sanjon and at that point I'm just bring that storms Indian and right something else like that whole bunch of Indian and like would be walking towards like Sanjon like the scenario that I was about and maybe along with that and like Torn Indian they would be also telling like the Indian guy as well to that tail officer like the canary pyramid. So at that point, I'm looking at the Enrico guy would be mostly as they would be, they them three would be walking to it like Sanjo, like the Enrico guy would be that thoroughly like thinking in his mind as well, like to come up with like a strategy to and the Enrico guy at that point would be planning on like basically do that unexpected to make that absolute betrayal once that person is looking candidate that so that strong switching candidate they get then more close to it like that Sanjo would be and at that point I'm going to be setting up like the edge so like at that point, I'd like that with last second to betray, make that betrayal and like to target like opponents to be anyway, and like to have to get eliminated with two or like 20 guys before his line. At that point, like as like the three of them would be walking towards like Sanjay, it's like the scenario. But like I'm looking at that point, like them in like the massive result with like Sanjay at that point, like filling on the weapon, this weapon is definitely my thing on so that probably resulting in like that probably resulting in like the almost sitting candidate as well as like that from Korean candidate like also getting scared and intimidated by someone like the scenario that I was. And that probably resulting in like at that point like the immigrant guy probably taking advantage of that situation, telling that basically it's to proceed to target like Saigon to of like on the like we can organize like when the guy at that point would be convinced that because remains to be again like with an hour currently. And at that point, I was feeling like time would be getting short. Like I was doing maybe like only 30 seconds to hearing it. So like at that point, like I'm feeling that that's on kicking generated and like old man kicking generated at that point would be asking like 20 guy and see like 10 to their target like instead of like Sundown or here and there, like they would be asking like 20 guys. So at that point, like I'm looking like them all like looking around each other. And like and at that point, like the Pentagon guy probably saying just game and like it's the guy at that point saying that like that time is like usually short that basically at that point I'm looking like time would only translate like the scenario that and at that point like Pentagon guy straight away telling that strong candidate that like to target like the whole messaging and which is like the scenario that is going and like the Pentagon guy would be at that point saying things along the lines of like basically it was like among like the sitting candidates being different on top of among all the sitting candidates where there's different on top of that second kind of like it would be just like that single candidate can only feel that just being the also like like the guy totally manipulating the remaining sibling candidates and turning companies like government sibling candidates by almost sibling candidates by saying that they, even if like the government sibling candidate like wins like a lot of money and basically since it would have made that much of the consumption who is like so extremely old to be allowing the lines of looking like the guy at that point selling them and like the guy at that point telling the remains sibling candidates along the lines and manipulating them and saying along the lines of like usually it's probably unfair to like share like a lot of money with like the government will get together and like maybe going guy at that point put it like the remains sibling guy and like that way like I'm putting that through that same people like manipulation like turning like the remain civilian and that if the remain civilian candidate on top of like the NPL against like almost civilian candidate like the scenario that I'm different. So at that point I'm looking like the way saying all these civilian candidates after like the hospital up after like then become like in a certain had price like when you don't like that it's important to be candidate at that point would be totally like shouting out in an angry manner towards like the NG guy and that the audience to be candidate at that point will be totally getting frustrated and scared and basically telling them to like no false for like the NG guys like manipulation and all that like the scenario that yet like I'm looking like why like the audience to be candidate would be saying all this like I'm looking like the candidates like all of them will be turning against like government to be candidate and like will be slowly walking towards like government to be candidate like putting up and I'm looking like at that point like it will be like the individual guys that will be taking the lead and like walking over and forth towards like the government to be candidate will be getting into that we're getting into like corner like situation and one of like that will have like putting up and at that point I'm looking like the government to be candidate like so probably for like individual guy but this if like the Indian guy attempts to like the organizer being accurate when he is ensure to like take like the guy as well. And also again and like he will be making that absolute correct that against like the Indian guy and like the organizer being accurate like taking that stand and position I like the edge of the circuit to grab a like the incoming in different guy who will be like slowly walking towards like the organizer being candidate with like both of his arm up towards like a raised up to and so like there are facing like the oldest Indian candidate and like moving towards like the Indian candidate. So like at that point like the oldest Indian candidate as well would be raising both of like with like and preparing himself to like get up like the going guy once that when the guy would be attempting to like look for the guy would select the scenario. But like I'm looking that then the guy once he was getting seriously close to like the oldest Indian candidate like at that very last second like I'm looking like when the going Indian guy like freaking like the oldest Indian candidate and using this like just like scenario using it like with like scenario better. And that way like the oldest Indian candidate like getting tricked and like that way like the oldest Indian candidate getting eliminated by getting that focus like clinical and not the career. And that way I'm just bring that fundamental premise and probably coming that the end guys like in like the second pillar like the final scenario being that the end guy eliminating like the opponents will be candidate and then we bring that totally happening while 5 seconds alone to do that anyway is like for like to complete like the game in like the second pillar like the scenario that I'm doing and that while after like that game will be completed that one like they would be investigating candidate or getting into that the elevator to proceed to that the pillar like once they would be getting out through that elevator and that once that the elevator would be moving downward like until that time when I'm looking that in a shortly during that time I'm looking that Sanjan still uh, would be pointing his like weapons and like would be standing at one corner of that elevator is like looking out at that yet like I was opening like for like and at that point I'm looking like the NG1 guy and like the remaining Supreme candidate will be talking between each other like provide and saying something about like Sanjon. So like I'm looking like yet like I'm looking like before like that elevator reaches like the bottom of like the pillar like I'm looking like Sanjon like getting distracted for like a tiny bit of like a brief moment and like I'm looking at that one like that from Supreme candidate like taking advantage of that just like a brief like state of like Sanjon he that probably still like develop some kind of like scenario that and at that point like him taking the weapon and like him suddenly getting back all that loss of confidence of like that strong game and so that at that point getting back all that lost confidence of him. It's like the scenario that I'm looking and that way like him from after like getting back the weapon him laughing that villain stick laugh and basically that way that Sandron at that point will be that CC and stuff will be feeling scared at that point it's like the scenario. for like the baby and everything that is an arc that I'm going to the film and the frame for that one like the CN and the third killer will be bringing at that point just like I'm saying that the like the sudden account in that way with like the strong studio candidate like getting that thinking that the weapon from Sanjay like in getting that sudden boost of that confidence and like in once like the studio like the killer within systems like like a material like a that can totally like can as well exactly like the organ candidate to be deep down having that an extreme feeling of like a race towards Alexander due to Alexander having played that with Alexander's journey like the content function with Alexander having chances like to a great extent of like an effort into that saving a lot of like shipping candidates like the so like due to this reason like I'm definitely that's from I'm been a bit that shipping candidates they currently also having that extreme race towards like Sanjay and might have always they don't want to like to eliminate to not only get Sanjay eliminated but like walking that to be able to like to, along the lines of those different actions might be having that realistic to send that and within it might see the able to implement it. So like with back in finally getting back to weapon that really like that with the concept like a certain like in like the third pillar, like once like the civilian like the third pillar would be beginning at that point, like I'm like in making the like face in front of that white facing Sanjo and telling how badly he wanted to eliminate Sanjo within that time and everything. So that him saying all that to like Sanjo and basically that and like by pointing like the weapon like I'm just like walking towards like Sanjo and it's in there Sanjo is like personality that I'm doing. Sanjo would be in that corner kind of like state and like in the treatment of like a villain lab would be that working closer and closer towards like Sanjo's like the scenario that I'm doing and like I'm doing that uh, and I'm going that one that will be getting extremely close towards like Sanjo and at that point I'm looking that actual shell that I'm looking like the individual guy as well will be walking right behind steadily walking right behind that villain thinks we can candidate like pretending to be on his side. It's like the scenario that I'm looking at. To generate Sanjo would be along the lines of looking like the individual guy will be also putting on a fake act while steadily walking right behind like that villain candidate would be walking towards like Sandom, pointing towards like the scenario that I'm sorry. And like I'm looking like at that very last second, once like if you get close to that Sandom will be at that very last second, like I'm looking like then the guy is only making that absolute trial and that to and I'm looking like then the guy giving that sound that push to that strong university bring guy to the side. And basically that will be also in that not only that winners to the candidate getting eliminated but like I'm just that due to lack of the fixed weekend candidate like I don't remember the route at that point would be holding on to a weapon like and which means that one that engine guy would be pushing that will be even that unexpected close to like that will fixed weekend candidate that putting in like the winner fixed weekend candidate like losing to like parents that after like during that phone call of like that winner fixed weekend candidate like I'm looking like his arms like really swinging and usually that was putting in like the weapon right like when like as well. And I'm going like that way, like by Enzuban guy that way will be attempting to like eliminate that strong benefit seeking and like then when guy as well will be badly injured and that way according to my information probably calling for like when guy that they did just injury by eliminating like that strong and benefit seeking candidate. And that way like Enzuban guy protecting that the baby that same that the babies that the injection are that I'm looking for the and I'm looking at that extreme injury that the Enzuban guy will be even struggling to that state at that point with like the scenario that I'm looking at. So at that point, like the final words of that Lincoln guy would be to Sangyong to that to take care of this would be along the lines of the like Lincoln guy would be totally begging Sangyong all the way to like Lincoln guy like that from but that absolute fears of like regret and everything. It's also like the scenario that I'm moving on and my particular so like I can remind the members of that way, like I'm feeling that still even after like the intern guys will be that way getting eliminated, like I'm still like the timer will be still going on, and I'm feeling that a whole minute would be still remaining even after like the intern guys stay eliminated. Just remember the intern, I'm feeling like the scenario being that it being due to that even though like the condition of like the three elimination for like the game will be completed at that point. Like still, I'm looking that the timer will be still going on as for like in a realistic manner as for like if like the shooting candidate wants to do that want like mock elimination and it's like the scenario that I'm in that way like I'm looking like after like the villain guys like they need to like Sanjay to take care of like this baby and basically after that and after like that like I'm becoming like the one of like the remaining among like one of like the feminist candidates who won't be that much courageous or anything but like among those remaining student candidates on the spectrum that like I'm saying that one of them like basically at that point like noticing how like the kind of still going on and everything that even though that's really candidate won't be seeing the courageous or anything like everything like that have to greed feeling of greed like still consuming him to the point of that at that point that makes him that require for like the seeking candidate and pushing one of like the seeking candidate and that and basically eliminating one of the seeking candidates like the scenario in a totally unexpected manner of like scenario and Tanjana as well at that point is totally so and like at that point like the moment that single seeking candidate will be pushing another seeking candidate and that eliminating but Sydney candidate at that point in that from like the remaining Sydney candidate, like one of those candidate will be pushing this Sydney candidate. He would have made that the right at that point of like the scenario parameter. And like that way, like the remaining Sydney candidate will be more quite like the feature uh, of that pillar and basically due to that app will create consuming all of them at that point is that it's like the scenario that I'm getting and at that point it's like I'm going like an enraged and shocked and like enraged Sanjay like looking at that point he was quickly picking up like the weapon like which would be in that hands of like the eliminator in the guy and I'm looking like Sanjay at that point like while pointing like the weapon, shouting out to like the remaining candidate who will be like to finish it up to like to probably uh, to probably stop and not to like even dare to even think about like trying to like eliminate even a single speaking candidate anymore. To be along the lines and to like I mean it's Indian British will be something out at them with like by calling out like weapon like the scenario that I'm like probably pointing out at them and like calling them the remaining candidates like of like the third pillar as like maybe 30 seconds would be remaining like I'm doing until that game will be over like from like then after like that final 30 seconds of like the it's the game of the like possibly like finals that encourage pointing out kind of like the speech to prevent shooting candidates like the black under calling them monsters like that the create have conceived that to at the point of that even with that the current situation with that with that them getting like split up what money that they can live and extremely even way more than like extremely comfortable life they could like live in that necessary get like they are free confident to like still act out like such green monster that is the first line comes in that taking out that race as like all of the remaining thinking candidates monsters and like for so I'm not telling them all of them to be ashamed of themselves and look at what like the games have turned them into and basically along this line something like shouting out at them and blaming them turning to being candidates at that point for like that and that ability will be like scenario that I'm and that maybe at that point is when I'm like the women's winning candidate will be at that point and Sanjon like voice will finally getting heard at that point. It's like a scenario that I'm and like at that point, like an encouragement, like Pandon who playing experiment, we get it and shouting out them that at that point, at that point, finally, I'm going like some young word like finally singing in to like this and singing and like that them totally feeling ashamed about like the thing created even to that very last word like the very end like the video even when they have also making one like this game and all that like brilliant finale that I'm looking and like that way like I'm looking like them most likely about the head down thinking feeling of pain like and that point is like another like and like so 30 seconds being over and I'm looking back to the that way like 60 game like during like the winners of the 60 game today like Sunday and making basic and like making three most likely three or four like running switching candidates you know being like the winners of like the weekend before still like the scenario that I was going so like let's say you know to trend right now it's not like in New York State like I'm definitely like the lyric scenario to be like New York finally making it to like Charo of like the man basically entering that room and basically definitely I'm afraid that since like the had revealed that like it alone that other than the frontman that has access to like the frontman that the game and that after the elimination of the doctor like you know who have definitely picked up that's taken like the mask of that dog, the limit of so like using like the mask of that dog are different like will be how some people right now the New York will be usually uh infiltrate into that current of the minus like the scenario that about going to And also, I'm still thinking about the for like the initial scenario being like after like making it to like the front man role like and like you're finding like the hard copy of like connecting like the details of like the marks of the candidate and looking like you're only managing to that destroy that hard copy. But like I'm trying to see at that and you're succeeding in that and you will be only when you feel a review and find of like finding how to save like the odds of the candidate. But like after one like you are really feeling a review at that point and the third thing of that like you need as soon as possible and champion possible to like to escape from like the game and then like your would be things that after like the discussion of the hard copy, but like the moment you will be turning back like I'm so like it will be like the frontman in both side would be like that is fight behind Neil at that point. Like the scenario that I was thinking. Like the frontman would have definitely seen that whole like the journey of Neil to make it to like the hope of like the man and that and that and like Neil while even Neil was like in like the elevator fighting against like the opponent thing that all that I can like in my mind of speech especially in the yeah, like I'm between like so it is like the presence of like the VIPs right now or the different like the frontman might have not been like will make it towards like near and that might have been like the sole reason for like the frontman having that be like feeling the scenario that I'm so like that way I'm like yeah like I'm putting you appearing in like the story like the art copy connecting to the start scene you can like yeah like the frontman only being able to like make it towards like New York exactly while New York would have destroyed like the hard copy so like yeah like frontman is for not being able to like figure out who hard copy basically candidates like hard copy what is that like neon has destroyed like during the scenario that I'm looking here like as one of like neon movie succeeding in like destroying like that hard copy of my capacity candidate like I'm from that and neon totally getting there by like the online is like the scenario that I'm looking at the camera frame. Yes, so like the feeling of prevention right now that's all like then becoming right now agreeing to that eliminate that player 222 in like the second pillar and that will just go take us an absolute big action by like 20 going down. The new frame is especially with like 21 guy right now wanting to like separate Sanjon from like the baby like in after they want like 21 guy with the deciding to like only separate Sanjon from like the baby and for like 21 guy to like essentially to like already get all of the ceremonies in the candidates to eliminate sun work to be on like 21 guy to be so that like and then for like 21 guy to like ensure like to ensure like the protection of the baby and ensure that the babies along with that 21 guy win like the 60 game and survives even like the third kill up 21 like 21 guy in planning certainly on permission because of like the current situation like especially with like junkie probably before the elimination having given like the baby to like Sanjay to like take care of the baby like and definitely right now like 21 guy we should only would be in a screen in the manner like with the like everything of like basically I think along the lines that like basically then different guy one like 10 different guy with the right now deciding to to like win like the games and to like get all that reward money and also 10 different guy would get that much absolutely fixed in his mind to like luckily not leave the student in the town if they between two elemental line left and become like to become will be fixed in his mind but like from like the different guy point of view like just winning like experience alone they won't be enough for like the one guy might want to like live but like they just like would be like the independent guy would be the supplement so that so not for that to happen from the instant guys can be like instant guys you know within that like really to like ensure that like Sangyong doesn't win like the fifth and final season along the line something like instant guy is taking it. And so people listen for like instant guy right now himself like say saying that in like at like the game in like the second pillar and then the straight away saying about like separating Sangyong and like the baby that would be with that aspect and then the like 10 people that guys to like at that point itself like to focus on like trying to like eliminate Sangyong at that point it's like the scenario it's like my portfolio so then the name of the preemption right now with like all of the candidates right now looking towards like front one and with like one of the distinct candidates for like the name of the preemption right now for like the independent guy right now totally telling that effect to the candidate who has taken like the phone to like hand over like the post to that independent guy especially because of that that is meaning that the independent guy that has eliminated that means in like from like the first of like so like I'm saying like the identity telling him that is disabled with that he knows like that way to do it would be along the line like the guy would be fundamental and tracking that Squid candidate will have the right now picked up left the ball, and that way like when the guy would be taking the ball, and then looking like when the guy at that point would be telling like the remaining Squid candidate as well, who's like who are like right now working towards like content to like totally for them to like totally step aside, and that like then when they would into it like so like that way like when guy from the like like support like looking towards like all the internet like working towards Sanjo, and I'm looking at that point like when the guy totally telling Sanjo to like basically Sanjo gives up the like journey through like the games right now and separate himself from like the baby then like when the guy would will take as good care of like the baby. So for like Sanjo to like do that actually sacrifice and separate himself from the baby will be along the lines and to bring that as like when you can right or wedding time will be slowly working towards that front on the sector for would be totally good for the left front on that for that the scenario that and then because they are totally protecting that would be doing that was maximum to totally destroy that Sanjon's like optimism and his like ideology and everything and like then you can then definitely putting that even accusing Sanjon of like even that Sanjon has survived like the first weekend who led the elimination of unexpected candidate definitely led them to the telling to be like okay accusing Sanjon that they believe the they did agree won't be safe with like Sanjon if that's the day to believe that the play point will be along the lines of the point like when you can like doing that was maximum to totally trick Sanjon into that okay having Sanjon that sacrifice so that like the baby would be so that like the independent guys would be able to that bring like the games and we just games with like and we would like the baby it's definitely on the trend but like I'm saying that even by like independent guys will be that's what like I'm still like manipulate Sanjon like I'm and definitely Sanjon so be feeling confused because of that then you guys like playing like Sanjon like I'm Sanjon even remember at that point of that how in like the first thing Sanjon has eliminated the thing and that like Sanjon has his own ideology at that point so along the lines like I'm from Sanjon you are recollecting and remembering all of that back it's definitely not very ambitious yet like I'm the different that we that's the task like Sanjon will be like remembering all the past members of his friend like Sanjon will be remembering like Jumpy like final moment as well like the fact that like Jumpy had like really have enough which was to like have like Sanjay take care of the baby. That's how much like Dundee had played all that hope on that Sanjay taking care of the baby. So like that memory will be got like will be finding branching into like Sanjay's mind at that finding of it like the scenario that I'm looking for like for again that at that point I'm looking for Sanjay only fixing in his mind to like definitely not be to not do that sacrifice and give like the baby up to like independent guy will be along the lines of that final decision that like Sanjon becoming the outcome. But like suddenly Sanjon did only believe that basically that like the baby will be in better hands like growing up with like Sanjon rather than the independent guy. So he, at that point Sanjon will be finally fixing in his mind and come to that realization it's like the scenario that I'm looking for. So at that point I'm saying like Sanjon totally quickly and like filling out like verbal and like pointing at like the different guy and then when like Sanjon at that point project like the different guy or like the different guy with like the whole would be working towards like Sanjon like probably repeatedly telling Sanjon to like the presence and like the baby at that point I'm looking like Sanjon like holding like the baby close to him and like threatening like the different guy that like basically if like the different guy takes one more step towards like Sanjon then like Sanjon be uh, throwing like the kind of weapon and then we be ensuring to like take like the individual guys as well out long to be along the lines of the like Sanjon while in that corner to doing like making that happen for against like individual that like scenario that happening and like Sanjon will be making that sort of with that absolute determined and see like the scenario that happening and that seems me scary like individual guy definitely not a game so at that point, I was like the England guy probably deciding to give up this like attempt to like eliminate Sanjay like the scenario that I was going right. And also according to the Greenwich probably think that one like Sanjay will be pulling out his weapon like at that point from the spring like definitely the VIPs who are like watching that that's the game that would be totally shocked. And like definitely I'm sitting remember friends that actually VIPs will be having absolutely no idea at all uh, about like info like secretly getting that advantage of that type of thing like Sanjo, especially when the friends. So like Sanjo is like putting out like the weapon like I'm that for like really shocking like all the VIPs and Jack and putting like the VIPs all of them instantly getting angry except for like that single VIP who would be like rooting for like Sanjo. Like I'm putting like all the remaining VIPs getting extremely angry and like straight away questioning from manager about this unfair situation as well, why exactly the thinking candidate is given a welcome. So at that point, I'm in hope totally manipulating even the VIPs in the scenario that I'm saying. So at that point, would be telling the VIPs that they things the hint for the game was alternate I think even before the voting after the fifth game was over I think even before that voting the hint for the game was given as for it being a target and elimination kind of game. So that the info telling at that point manipulating and telling the convincing the VIPs that by saying that they will be so in that voting the ones who had voted to voted to leave the student after the game in that voting the ones who had voted to leave the game were thoroughly risking themselves becoming the target for the sixth and final game will be along the lines of the info will be the command will be teleconsidered. So since out of that voting it was things three targets were supposed to be selected and since as well as Sandon had water. I don't have water to leave the games so definitely due to this reason and since remaining majority of the game candidates the entirety of the remaining game candidates has water to continue playing the game. So since it's a majority versus a minority situation. So to make so in such a situation to make the game fair and and you could to give that equal chance for the targeted game candidates as well to survive the game and to make that game fair in hope had given the weapon to Sandon would be along the lines of the in hope to be probably tricking and manipulating and that way convincing the VIPs as for why Sandon have weapon in the game is in the scenario that I'm making over the page and the and also my contribution for the Promanico at that point also tricking and manipulating and convincing the VIPs by telling them that the fact that Minty got eliminated from the first pillar was only due to Minty going crazy and ending up forgetting about Sanjon having the but would be along the line something the Promanico only saying and manipulating and tricking the VIPs into believing that was the scenario that I'm delivering and not delivering. So that fundamental difference from total thing by the time that Sandon will be putting out the weapon and basically making that threat of an initial because the civilian get and candidate will be attempting an elimination before by then the time would have so much time would have passed that and the only 1 minute will be remaining effect was now that so at that point I was bring that threat of Sandon not only staring 20 guys and eliminating 20 guys but the other game candidate calculators the scenario that I'm looking at. At that point is when I was bring then the guy will be looking at the time and seeing how 7,000 time that can be at that point is when the different guy will be playing just manipulating strategy and will be turning all the according to my presentation will be turning all the remaining skill candidates again the old man skill candidate and basically that way the old man skill candidates getting eliminated in the second in the round is the event scenario that is sitting on the end. So the three member potential right now is even though the support in the second pillar as well. Still I'm looking in the third pillar in definitely I think the difficulty levels will be increased to the point of they are not even not being not a single sport at all in the third pillar is in the scenario that I'm going to bring up. Okay, so the three member potential right now is for when going through the level before Squid Markets more right now certainly finding out that the winner of the 24 game has already been decided. And that it is Sanyo. That's the scenario that I'm talking in that game market I'm doing for the scenario to be more shocking being towards the final page of that book will be seeing Sanyo's photo being stepped onto the final page and declared as winner of the 24 game. So along the lines of a shocking realization happening Neo right now. It's the scenarios that I'm different. So that way Neo probably realizing that the yes, perfect game this would be along with the lines of the different Neo and that's the shocking realization. So and just to be the reason for info in the 2024 game in Sandon journey through the 2024 game while info had was playing as a fitness thing that describes of playing as a game candidate around Sandon info having multiple times ensure to multiple times that having to get effort to ensure that Sanjon survives and win the Squid Game one by one. Definitely my very ambition, and that event would be what that would be right now. Getting to all the way to that basically involve before like this is Squid Game even giving like weapon to like Sanjon and all that. Like all this will be connected. You know, like definitely my friend from right now is definitely that like since like info only has given up in like the past had been revealed to like have given up one of like kidneys to like Janko. I'm comparing like that like you have get the integration of like Kimbo like this that single kidney of that info might be having power issues. Might be like the situation with like info right now. But so like in terms of all that huge sum of money that like a huge sum of wealth and money that like info have, like still info might be currently like the person will be in such a situation where like info will be only having like maybe few months or like a single year left might be the situation with like Info might be the case definitely mental to like Info himself would be in like an extremely worried and desperate situation because like definitely after like winning like the 20 games that which have been revealed right now which have been revealed to be through like the help unfair advantage of like a help of like Ilnam to like Info and basically my but the ambition that like even back then like I'm like Ilnam deciding to like successfully help info back then might be definitely undergoing like might be used to info in actuality might be like the son of like in definitely at the same time and sitting them at the dream and person that like so that guy would be like might be like a younger product of that might be like the actual younger product info is definitely might be trained so like and like back in like the 2015 weekend like in coffee might be considered my mention that like it might have been in that might have been that client in that job place of like in that about to can give money to like info to like save info's wife and which had really five into like info getting into that primary case and basically losing his job and like losing info that they losing his wife and like basically info like life getting destroyed all the way to like the point of like info eventually ending up in like the 20 billion black and all this might have been realistically done successfully done by Ilna might be the case of the implemented to eventually trap info into like the to like the civilian for like Ilna to like pass like the higher uh, pass like the position of like running like the civilian to just like some info like Ilna might have abandoned in like the info might have been like the case of the implemented. And I'm still thinking about the impression that like the old man Scudian candidate who had like the memory history in like the students in like 2020 when Sanjay had first entered into like students in that old man Scudian candidate was like friends with like Sanjay and played like students and all of like India all the way from like the like like Indian would be definitely like might be definitely like the not in number like might be in number like twin brother identical twin brother might have been actually something father actually might be the case that lead by the impression that I'm sitting on. So it might be the reason for like info the from an info back then like basically reporting as like government candidate was allowed to play like current like green like green along with like non like the fact that like back then the from an info was like reporting to someone about like the preparations of like the hospital like that reporting might have been towards like by info definitely might have been like to be like the identity of like the of like the farm of like Sanjay who would be like the person who would be having like the memory issue. But in the case of like even Ilna as well, like eventually Ilna as well might have had health issues to the point of like Ilna maybe getting terminal disease, terminal illness might have been what might have happened. So like and that yeah, the doctors might have told Ilna that like Ilna had not much time left. And so like it might be at that point that like Ilna like at that point definitely the highest priority in like Vietnam, like might have remained the upper like Vietnam might have actually played like first two games, which might have been like the very first two games in like 1999 that around the that like Vietnam might have done like the winner and like actually the person who might have created like games in like 1999 like might have been also like not have much time left for like internet after like now my job came with the winner of like 1999 studios that anything like of the creator of like studios might have passed on like might have made like in like the passed on like the question of like running the studios to like in might have been since then like something like in might have been totally So then like the biggest priority in that might have been to like ensure that like the student that Finland was like running Finland might have been so really passionate about like having like student students like launching more and more and more uh, and ends up becoming like the best students among all the different students like in all the other countries like for like enough students that who's like enough and to be like to always like rank in like number one position for like the best students like each year might be that might be obviously like really passionate like in might have been about the selection. It might be the case is implementing. So like I'm feeling like the it might have been even eventually once like in might have had like a in the plan might have not had much time like in might have totally spoiled like in his life and might have like info to eventually end up into like the 2015 series might have been what kind of happens in like prediction and I'm like it's in that time like I'm from that I don't remember the question which I have maybe in like my earlier videos like I'm only uh, probably for like the Dakari guy that who might be also like Ilham like actual son like he might have for like a million of his like he might have developed like Ilham might have been the Clement and Ilham might have only seen like the Dakari guy as like a failure. So due to like the Dakari guy and the like might have been probably because that once like Ilham might have even from like the but like Ilham might have been forcing like the Dakari guy as people holding up like uh, uh, other than like Ilham Sultan might have been forced in like the lucky guy to that to take part in like the student and then lead to become like the winner of the student so that like Ilham would be passing on like the running up position of like running against the game to like the lucky guy might have been the case the element for which to that might have been that most important role which like open rate of like the student might have passed on to like in the month like in the might have worked like the 1999 might be like the Cleveland and in the who might have been probably passionate about like student uh uh children might have like seen that as like that absolute golden rule that he must follow and he must ensure that like the eventual next hire would be like running the experience should definitely be a winner of like the season might be that absolute priority for like in might be the something like that way like I'm the friend like me and also like the revolution that consumer revolution that while India might have been a client at like the might have purposely decided to be a client at like the job that like Info might have been working in like the past. So they are like like India might have registered as like fake identity or something and suddenly like Info might have never seen that India that client by the name so might have been in that like work with like info back then might be the case with legal insurance. So like it might have been after like the 2015 season might have been over and like info had like basically won like the 2015 against that and that or like and like it might have been right before like to game in like 2016 while info was like summoned by Inlam to give that unfair advantage of that weapon to like info. Maybe it might be at that point that like Inlam might have revealed to info might have taken off its mask and might have revealed to like interest that like the name of like it was found. Might be also the case that even like people at that point who had job everything is job wife and everything like and like for info to that point that info might have been for like a get like the story might have been really something for like to find that the father of Kent might be the case that maybe so like info at that point might have totally been totally happy that it has finally found that father. Uh, in might be the case definitely makes sense. So like that way, like the ideologies of like in like including like info as like simple might have carried on might be the case the PMI brain. So like the consumer consideration since like the 2015 Indian that might have been when like info might have been given like the position of like becoming like frontman it's definitely confirmation. So since then I'm differently given though that info might have seen how like Ella might have also introduced info to like the Lakini guy as well and might have revealed that like the Lakini guy is like the enough of nothing was when it's definitely confirmation. And the Lakini guy might have had that absolute towards like info info on top of like having jealousy towards like his father Ilham as well. Might be the case because of like both of them might be actually winners of like the game. This all that ideologies of like Ilham like evolution like info might have carried on and might have been so extremely passionate of that basically about like students and might be the reason for like even in like the beginning like the very beginning of like the students the series like even when Janko had found out like like the like the room that where like Janho believed like Info had lived during that point, like easily that room being not around luxurious room or anything might be even while during that time like Info was like had like the position of like the frontman with the all due to this extreme passion of like Info. Connecting to like experience where like Info might have not was bonded on to the use like for the wealth and money that experience that was like making for himself, but like he might have only wanted for like to gain to like plus more and more exactly like in that might be the thing exactly so like even in home might have never even asked like even back then while it was like enough that was running like he can like still even back then like info might have not asked enough for like any sort of luxury or anything so even so like the very exact ideology of like in might have probably passed this on to like in might have been carrying that same thing ideology of like enough and might have been the case with even friends so definitely Inho as well might have been putting in even by Inna might have been seeing like the Rakati guy as like a failure and Inho still might have had that might have only fond of like the Rakati guy as like Jenna brother and he might have also wanted like the Rakati guy to like eventually be like the just like practice because like Info might have only seen like the future where like actually eventually wants like won't be able to like on like experience anymore. Like at that point, like definitely it would be like the front man, that will be running like the field. But still, even then, like I'm like might have and like I'm running to get like the guy like the guy might have been so desperate to get like the position of like here to like around like the industrial students, especially my get like solely due to the fact of like the guy never having gone like this to get something like that might have not gone. Because that's what it to that's like and instead like might have product and perfect things that things to get like might have gotten that even by after like the 20 again as well while it was still in like this online experience still uh, even though info at that point might have been only given like the percent of like the from my like still multiple like in might have don't info that really eventually definitely should be info that will be like carrying on in that like the whole what the legacy of like in the mind that we are running like this again would be along the lines like in the mind of told in home even in like the process of like an extremely jealous like we might have been the case because even and in home might have it might be for this for like info how much like the like guy was like jealous like info and suddenly it's like info due to that the lucky guy not having the courage to like actually play like and run play like and win like the season. If you're on the line like it might have for this for like informative in the game and informative runs that's to like have like the lucky guy play games that are like that would be having the risk element far greater than just like playing lucky games alone. Definitely my brand. So like the lucky guy might have always like he might have even though he might have badly wanted to like run like a student, he might have had that big fear but then him connecting to like actually entering and playing and facing like the rookie games in like student. So like that might have been how he might have ended up becoming like the lucky guy and playing only lucky games alone might be the case definitely my brand. It was fear and like that way in shaping that game were like the element were like left. So like and so like to eventually get like the lucky guy to like take off like the game and like the students and for like the racket guys to like yes like accomplish this goal like and for my doubt okay even that put to like the racket guy and that might have been like eventually sending like the racket guy to probably play like the whole control and kind of like game against like Sandro and all that might be the case definitely my friend. So and once like that and like in that game like something like who might have been so before that like the likely like that would be nothing to defeating Sangyeon and like that way like Sangyeon getting eliminated as well as like likely guy becoming like the new and like likely guy that way being able to like accomplish the goals of that one good game like around like games as well as like as well might be for me at that point, feeling hopeful that maybe so that like basically during that point, definitely in that situation, might have definitely info might have had that issue for like single kidney and basically info might have had like not much time that might have been in those situations, definitely mentioned. So like info might have been totally hopeful of like the Latin guy defeating Sangyo in that game that they have played. Uh, but like I'm totally like totally contrary to like the most expectation with like something guys I'm going to get starting guy and like get like coordination at that point like even though info might have initial reaction of info might have been in its really embraced and like Sangyo and at that point itself like info might have fixed in his mind like when we have Sangyo like enter into like the Indian pop buildings and like before at that point might have totally targeted like found out like Janbe that has the great friend of like Sanjon might have totally ensures to like totally have Janbe get trapped into like the civilian connected to war. Which like that move that Hamilton probably might have made uh, uh, informative after like Sanjong has defeated and eliminated like Bakri might have been the case of human. So like I'm definitely uh, the like regular consumer different one like info might have targeted like Janbe and like might have planned in mind to like definitely not only Janbe but like Sanjong as well into like different info things. Like at that point like info mindset might have been to like definitely to give that absolute suffering to like Sanjong all throughout like overall like different students like to have like found out like make it towards like the very end of like the content of students and then to like we have found out base it out and get eliminated towards like the end of like the content for and basically for like that they might have then so like that might have been in a plan but you know so like for like kind of like also lose some way along the way in like the content of students and that also will actually cause that much of like even more suffering to like kind of that might have been what like info might have planned in mind certainly might have especially because of like info having seen how much like Sandron cares about like the black friends since like Sandron elected in the students had basically given up like that and that affects the reward money solely to like play song and all that. So definitely it might have so that like it might have been a consistent investing thing that might have done by to get revenge on like Sandron by getting targeting Janbe and getting Janbe to like enter into like the 20 for students and like Sandron. Certainly might have been so definitely and like after like the fact that like info had like really ended as like in the disguise as like a shooting candidate only after like the initial red like green light stadium in like 2024 like the fact that like info didn't know that right off the bat in like the rendering what's written and basically that was the prime of like they to like info might not only expected like Sangyeon to definitely attempt to like save like swing candidates in like the red light green light game in like 20 games and for like Sangyeon that for the attempt of like Sangyeon to like only probably wait and that part would be what like no might have only expected but like seeing how much like Sangyeon had efficiently saved such great like the majority of like the swing candidates in like the red in like quick game like at that point like I'm like the info might have switched plans and might have decided to like cause suffering to like Sangyeon by having by simultaneously ensuring that like Sangyeon attempts to like by having like Sangyeon like uh, attempt each time in future plays against to like save the Indian candidates like failing repeatedly and also to like have that Sangyeon and info might have only felt that fear as well that if like info doesn't disguise and as like a Indian candidate and play like a Indian along with like Sangyeon, then like Sangyeon might actually succeed in like not only saving like the majority of the Indian candidates, but also maybe changing like the mind of the majority of the Indian candidates and getting like the majority of the Indian candidates like out of like the Indian through like the vote and everything. Maybe along the lines like info might appear to like to cause that extreme suffering to like Sangyeon as well as to ensure that all like Sangyeon like plans and everything that and to ensure that like then that Indian candidates like keeps continuing like the game all the way to like the game that info might have decided that kind of as like a Squid like that elected into the first Squid Game might have been the case that new everything. But like the turning point might have and this might be the reason for like to create that much more of like a suffering to like Sanjay might be the sole reason for like maybe that can info totally like helping steadily helping Sanjay out in like multiple of like uh like in like Sanjay like journey in like different first Squid Games definitely might be the case definitely to get Sanjay all the way to like the very final pitch Squid Game and then to have Sanjay totally get eliminated and like info might have back when even plan to like maybe to rebuild that like the sender times like of like info that was like the person running like to like Sanjay before like Sanjay will be entering into like the game in like we will steadily reveal that like Sanjay and his need to that way by then to like have Sanjay's voice or Sanjay himself like to force Sanjay himself in a steady manner to manipulation to like attack like support the game or like Sanjay had eliminated later and basically that way to like have Sanjay himself the point like ideology and everything and basically to eventually have like Sanjay before like Sanjay's like elimination like to the end to have Sanjay go through that retrospective uh, and that such a revenge might be what like informative initial plan, but like I'm sure the turning point where like everything might have changed, might have been like few possibilities. one possibility might have been like it might have been like the change in his mind and plans might have happened like maybe like the point where like generally that they might have was like one like the with like one possibility that I'm having. Or like it might have been when like the Portman Park was like friend like had got eliminated like because like until that point I was as for like the other possibility that until that point like I'm thinking like Info might have had like a putting no plans that also to like have Sangyeon as like a success. And his plan might be to like suffering elimination for like Sangyeon and to have uh um the boardman park, even though the boardman park is like kind of this before like still to have like the boardman park like carry on like the person of like running like the student until and like Info might have been placing on the hopes on like path being able to like find a successor in that in that one of the videos that running like student after like he will be taking chance might be around the lines like Info might have focused the new so like that on that expectation of Info might have that time and the like once like Info might have talking from now about like park elimination especially this might be also the reason for like that much of a strong happening for like Info on finding out about like news like park eliminations also really memorable. So maybe even more than 20 like it might have to do with like having lost just like plan having to like plans destroyed to like have such a sort of like having not much time left himself so like within the kid and then it might be the case the release might injury and so like it might be I'm being more about to that maybe at that point that like info might have added things up and might have created a new plan and that might have been to that only to have Sangyeon like basically to probably forget Sangyeon and basically to turn Sangyeon to have like Sangyeon destroy his own Sangyeon himself destroy his own ideologies to the maximum and to turn Sangyeon exactly like Shinho. And basically that way with like Shinho won't have much time left like, to have Sangyeon along with like the baby end up becoming like the winners of like the 2024 students and that way to have like to pass on like the background to like Sangyeon to like the students from 2025 onwards. And basically, eventually, even if like Sangyeon as well, not being a young person, like, and the sport, like, through in those, like, electric strategy of, like, manipulating and changing Sangyeon, like, might be able to, like, have Sangyeon run, like, the against sport, like, figure eight while into, like, the future until, like, the baby, grows up and becomes another and basically for at that point to like eventually have uh like that Sangyeon pass on the baton to that person to like like the student from that point on. Be along the lines of the like inform my job plan at that point. Definitely my anchor at that point, definitely my friend, especially and inform my job totally even felt that maybe by having like Sangyeon along with like the baby ending up becoming next the winner of like the 2024 student like even once like the baby grows into another track. Um, that person would have to like play like the students enter and play and play like the students again to have that qualification to like run like against things like the baby element like Sandra will be already winning at the don't think possible will be also along the lines that info might have probably believe and might have hope and plan in his mind might be the case certainly might be very question. And that way, remember the remission program bring that to it knows like when the speak plan like probably have like Sanjong to thoroughly crush like Sanjong's like ideologies to like experiment to have that shift happening within like Sanjong's like mindset to have like Sanjong finally get turned into having like the exact same ideology and mindset as that of like info to have that happen might be the sole reason for like info in another manner before like game building that weapon to like Sanjo might be the case certainly by the bravery. So that like info might have hoped that we want like Sanjo to be using the weapon hand like or the other remaining civilian candidates will be getting eliminated and like Sanjo will be becoming like the winner of like the 21st game along like the baby like at that point like we definitely info will be easily able to like pass on the baton to like Sanjo might reward like info might have hoped but like all that might have really backfired but just like Sanjo for me not doing like the exact thing that info had done in like the past of like basically accepting that the weapon and that going through with it that while in like the past had given like the to that info in like the 15 civilians like Sanjo being different and still holding on to this like ideologies like something like that might have been like the biggest backfire and like that destruction of like that absolute hope that like input might have had like being able to like pass on the background to like something like to like the baby ones like the baby heroes of that or that hope might of like input might have complete of and stop for it like the waiting moment like by the sole action of like Sanjay. Once like Sanjay had taken that decision to like now this like the weapon can basically instead to like face like the deal along with like the baby. Was definitely might have been Yes, and definitely not good at right now. It's not like saying it is like that 6 minutes like I'm looking for right now for like scenario to be like night like that let's just like not a Syrian like no like the positive team attacking team would be like seeing like the huge scope of like where like Junko as well as like Junko is definitely not premise. So like I'm looking get like Junko and that's like remember I'm going to bring like through like the sound of like the attack of like the weapon of like the attack of like what you're saying or like the part you can say like I'm putting that definitely I'm looking right now for like scenario to be like Junko as well as like that other team member of like Junko from their board like Delta even through like the segment like then managing to like for like the like Squid workers like a bunch of Squid workers like getting up from the thing of Squid worker on like just like I'm looking like example and like the team member of the example from their board like will be seeing what like they will be getting close to like them who's more like looking after them. So like definitely I'm looking like example and like that team member of example probably taking advantage of like the thickness and like that way that's them to like totally like at that point like jumbo like police still like I'm actually giving jumbo that strong feeling that basically that single to get got up on the board to that like jumbo should focus on saving is like the scenario that I was without realizing whom that is the right thing. So like that way I'm like jumbo along with like jumbo's team member like steadily from the outer areas of like your boat that we just be taking position and basically once like the positive team would be getting close like and like them taking out like the positive team like the scenario. Yeah, like my positive impression for like by the time like Janto and that team member will be taking out like the positive team and the like still like the fast swinging candidate like taking hit at that very last second and like a different type of setting in that the fast swinging candidate getting eliminated like the scenario that I'm looking for. So after taking out like the positive team like I'm looking for that Janto and like that team member like quickly that making it towards like the goal of like the South Indian candidate, but like voted always struggle. But like I'm looking like at that point like jump up and like the team member would be the fraser and like save like the South Indian candidate and like that would be really asking him as for like why they love chasing him but like I'm looking at that point, like the fast food candidate would be at the verge of like elimination. So like I'm looking at the only thing the fast food candidate would be just probably saying like I'm looking like fast food candidate like at that very last moment like him holding on to like Junko's like collar and looking Junko's straight in like the eyes with that after the question telling Junko that like it's not is like the exact hospital the name of the exact hospital were like it's not it's like convicted and basically telling Junko to like save would be what like the only thing that the policy candidate to be able to like tell just of the box like to be getting eliminated like the I think he will be like succumbing to like injuries and getting eliminated like the scenarios that I'm looking for and my brother Emerson. So at that point like I'm looking like John Hope and like the team member of John Hope won't be having no more lead at all. But like that only single deal that like John Hope and the team member of John Hope will be having would be the exact direction from which like these two boats had basically showed up to like the location of like number four. So like I'm putting like John Hope complete putting in mind so that like it will be exactly in that exact direction they travel like they might find make it to like the stadium either. Be along the lines of like John Hope putting in his mind and I'm putting like especially that way John Hope along with like the injured team of like John Hope getting on that very same boat of like the parts in India and different like them totally heading off to that and I'm the next person like them taking that carrying the body of the constituting candidate and uh like placing it onto the boat and like the board of the park and basically then like John Host as well as like the then I'm also trying that John Host as well as like the team member of John Host getting on to like the board of the constituting candidate and like going along that exact direction. But these two both are basically showed up basically that way I'm like John Host along with like the team members like John Host uh, without much internet, like usually making it to finding like the studio minus like series of scenario that I'm looking for the program. So like that way, I go to the information about the like the moment like jump out and put like team member like the boat like making it through like this game and like at that point like like for have to be have to be no patrolling at all patrolling like this game and so like the scenario that I'm in, especially because like pro like the officer you know had changed like the patrol duty to like you know and like the past the candidate because like they had attempted their escape. So definitely there won't be anybody, any other game, and that also coupled with like the elimination of like the officer as well. But when they are sitting in like none of like the game of the even stepping out of like the game building, or like doing anything about like the like about like there being no response from the shooting and all that. That's another that I'm using that way. Uh, Jumbo along with like that team member of Jumbo only casually and being able to like make it to like Studio United just like without being seen without getting being seen by any studio like the scenario that happened. So like from there like I'm just like Jumbo and so, like and at that point I was going to Jumbo and this team member like will be exploring that island like hoping that it's like Studio Island. And with these boats having like the trackers onto them, like I'm delivering like also for like the scenario being that once like Jumbo and like team member will be taking like support of like the past candidate like and at that point self like jump out of be noticing that tracker location tracker being the unit that would yeah the leader of that would like the scenario that I'm jump out probably would be straight away detaching it and throwing it out to like see like the banana that I'm and like it would be through such a manner that I'm like jump out and would like seeing will be making it to like the game island like the scenario that I was going and so like delivering that way that by the time that jump on screen number would be literally from a distance would be seeing that the infrastructure of like the stadium of like one might be like stadium right there from a distance like jump out like screen number shop you will be seeing thanks to game work of like standing right use the game of stand right outside and stadium meeting and so stadium of the probably stadium of the school probably extremely that would be worried due to like the usually like they're not hearing anything from like the virtual team and app for like the location tracker of like that board that like the virtual team board of like the PUBG being generated as the virtual team one that is not going to and all that like it's not that and seeing like the game workers from a distance like and at that point like it being confirmed for like an example that basically that island is definitely came and it's like things that's not that and at that point the members of like example probably basically taking out the phone and basically calling like just like police chief and then like jump out clearly taking pictures of like the speaking of the from a distance and basically using the phone and basically sending it to like the police chief and then like even calling that police chief so then the police chief that like here from like the between Thailand and Nepal. Example, straight away would be when the box calling like the police chief and example would be even sending like a message like sending like the location coordinate for that island to give either to that the police chief and with that the message and everything. So that one like example will be and calling like the police chief. I'm different like at that point so maybe like the police chief himself like calling example and before like the whole to be calling like the police chief. So like that and everything. And the situation with like the police chief would be like the police chief by that would have made it to uh, would have made it to like Satan and might have seen Mr. Joy and not like Mr. Joy, but like might have also seen like the game really pop and like the mark that was like the Mr. Joy and all that. So definitely that the police by then will only convince and will be quickly phoning failure deciding to like jump up. So like considering those the time they all this happening is like the scenario that happened. So like before like that day before like jump out and like team member will be even carrying out like the instruction to like the billion building numbers for like Jumbo even that for Jumbo's phone call like I'm that back and message saying definitely that backup of like the police chief along with like a huge battalion of like police officers like basically get get it from like the mainland while tracing like the location coordinates of any game and like Sanar that again definitely that phone call definitely like the police chief like thoroughly want thoroughly the police is really attempting to like stop like Junko from like carrying out a sort of infiltration again into like the game meeting saying that like it will be it's like hugely dangerous for like Junko that like for Junko to like wait until like the back of the race and make it for them hot creators to like really do the infiltration to like the meeting. But like I'm saying like Junko won't be at all listening to like the police chief and like Junko only. And I'm looking at that point definitely like that team member of Junko as well will be telling Junko to like definitely wait for like the police backup because of that team member being already being injured and everything. So like yet like Jumbo probably forcing that team member like Jumbo to at that point self to like even before like the backup arrives to like really to the infiltration to like game building and like the infiltration without the really like the team member of like Jumbo getting eliminated by one of the game of the like in the scenario that I'm delivering and also made the conversion for like the to the configuration for putting like the Australian candidate like getting eliminated by like the first teams like without creating I'm looking at that point like things happening in parallel like I'm looking like simultaneously in parallel by sheer coincidence like I'm looking like simultaneously and in parallel like exactly doing like the elimination of like the Australian candidate just when I'm looking exactly like the elimination of like Neo as like by the front man while like Neo would be going through like to game after like by then like Neo succeeding in like tearing up like the hard copy containing the features of like Australian candidate and would be getting rid of like that after being of like being getting and like that like you want to be quickly trying to like escape like from like the studio building from like the from room at that point self comes like one like you will be turning back to like leave the from room at that point self comes like from at that point would be making to that when they will be standing right behind you know at that point and that would be straight away like eliminating you know like the scenario that so like this elimination of like you know as well as like the elements of like the past beginning and today, like in the like happening in parallel. It's like eventually Sunday in parallel, like in the scenario that I'm current. And that way, according to my preparation, probably cutting that even after like eventually once like the back police backup could be arriving back because battalion of like the police backup could be showing up to like the civilian island and basically once like in hope will be stopped uh, and once like all that will be over like and then because by then like the sixth game will be totally over and like Sandra like the baby Sandra like the baby would have definitely been declared as like the winner of the which two games like of like the 20 games definitely like the winner that I remember right? So like definitely still under the like even after all that will be over like I'm still Janko definitely won't be still when remembering and won't be forgetting about like that uh, final wish of like that Palestinian candidate, like which we would have told to like fundamental training, which we would have told to like Jumbo before getting eliminated about like the hospital like so like unlimited candidate. So that way I'm going definitely even after like stopping like the civilians and like most likely I'm going to bring like info getting captured, even though I'm going to bring like info won't be having much time to like I'm still right now I'm going to bring like the final scenario not being like info getting eliminated either by Sanya nor like through like the police battalion or something. But instead like I'm doing like a scenario where like Imbo will be getting arrested and taken and will be getting but yet like Imbo would be eventually getting eliminated due to like Imbo like single kidney having a kidney failure. It's like getting the scenario that I'm so sorry and Michael Korean. So uh, that way, like I'm considering definitely still I'm considering like Janko not forgetting about like that of the past new candidate and I'm considering definitely that surgery actually happening and basically that sort of new candidate that of like basically through Janko's help like that sort of for me of like the past new candidate of surviving and like then Janko taking care of like that sort of the past new candidate is like the scenario that I'm considering while Sanjon at that point can be like taking care of that of that jungle. There's like in the scenario that I'm looking at and I'm looking at. So it's a technical prevention right now. So that is then the guy will be totally hiding his like group idea and plan from lecturing his study candidate by writing lecturing and study candidate right now. It's definitely my training because like definitely I'm the like the guy would be certain that basically Sanjon won't be at all falling for like the drawing law idea certainly man very much to like that drawing out idea of like the independent guy to get done on to like drawing out would be probably a decoy of like a plan to have like the Renegade candidates fall for that decoy plan maybe what like the independent guy in the right now I can think remember it was like the independent guy right now only has 20% that like Sanjay definitely doesn't won't be at all falling for such a trick and basically definitely I'm considering like the influence guy plan would be like while like the singing candidate had played around paper scissors it is now like I'm considering so definitely while they were playing that around paper scissors like the influence guy alone might have been sharply paying close attention to like the time up to the time definitely not the so like even right now like I'm considering like definitely very less time will be left like I'm considering that synthesizing like even before definitely considering that right now only 30 seconds alone will be like remaining to complete like in like the second alone. Definitely remember it. So definitely the MD point either 30 or 20 seconds alone will be like right now. Definitely it's gonna it might be like 20 from that and that might be keeping that sharp height onto like the timer and we'll be doing that but that afterwards still so like that way have like all of like to trick all of the remains will be candidates that have all of their focus and attention to like only form of on my and because like alone that will be keeping that focus and attention on like the time on the time remaining is the minimum limit. So like can guys plan to be like definitely by standing there right now it's like that person who lost like the candidate who lost the of the it's like right like convince on like then one guy standing right beside by holding like the pole will be definitely according to like then the one guy plan bar like then the one guy might have like the remaining and that is the remaining speaking candidate by telling them that if not going to refuse for like refuses to like draw loss then at that point for him he will like totally eliminate plan job would be around the line then you can guys as far as like idea and plan might have told like the remains to be candidate and this might be the total support like then you can guy standing by holding that support to the item that even prevention but like the actual pro plan is like then you can guys definitely would be to like ensure like to save like the baby also like the chicken and basically in order to do that like then you can guys plan would be like the like what then you can guys will be told like fitting would be that for this that or the single QK candidate goes at like the edge, like speaking to like Sanjon, trying to like convince Sanjon to like draw not like would be only failing at like convincing Sanjon so like once like only 10 seconds alone would be remaining. At that point, like when the going guy would be planning on like basically using that force to like totally push and eliminate that QK candidate who had lost like the other plan really like trying to like convince Sanjon to throw the law. But remember by eliminating that exact QK candidate would be for like the Indian guys into planning the minimum assumption. And at that point, says like the Indian guy will go out to planning like straight away. Once again, like the remains Indian candidates by for doing that by telling the plan is it was because like definitely that he needs that like they need Sanyon and like the baby for like the third and final round of like the third pillar or like third thousand. So that definitely that way like they can ensure like the victory of like the six to gain even in like the third house without much hassle will be along the lines like without much hassle or struggle will be along the lines of like the different like will be telling the remaining swinging candidates and easily tricking like the remaining swinging candidates like the good scenario that I'm going. And at that point, I'm the program then sequence I will go to telling the remaining civilian candidates that like that's okay perfectly fair since like that civilian candidates that like then he's going to like according to the friend will be eliminating like the second tower like had totally lost like the game. So like definitely it's all fair would be along the lines like when different guys would be talking back to like the remaining civilian candidates and putting in manipulating them just like the in the scenario that is called and different. Okay, so like the new information right now so that will be candidate that goes to a function at full conjunction that's the middle of like the sort of like like function like in the button like understand the new kind of like initial thought I'm thinking right now we still actively to only use like the weapon and basically uh, uh, to elimination to like free conjunct to free the grip of that civilian candidate of Sangon. Like would be the first thing that might be come to like Sangon's mind like yeah, like Sangon would be no, not the won't be like the won't be able to like bring itself to that thing that is like what scenario that I'm from. Yeah, like I'm doing it being such an wonder between like Sangon and like all the remaining speaking candidates except for like 21 guys. So like I'm doing it with all of them like Sangon that are elected like resulting in like all of them pulling on like Sangon like I'm friends like collective pulling on Sangon and like Sangon that only being pulled inward to a certain extent with like the scenario that I'm like yeah like I'm even just before reaching like the middle like Sangon like I'm different kind of being pulled a bit inward with like the scenario that I'm yeah like I'm putting at that point Sangon totally holding on to like that code that code that basically tied onto like the ways of like that cooking and things like pulling Sangon like Sangon holding on to that code and I'm looking like Sangon totally detaching using the like weapon detaching that code above in front from like the Sangon will be holding like the scenario that I'm looking and at that point I'm looking like the remaining skipping candidates, like majority of that skipping candidates, like only falling backwards towards like the direction that like they will be like with that aspect strength will be pulling that them all falling towards that direction backwards by Sanjon along with that Indian candidate that who was like holding on to like Sanjon that falling backward in their direction, like the scenario that I'm saying. And at that point, definitely I'm the solely due to like Sanjon on the manipulation by then would have pulled a bit further inward before like Sanjon will be detaching like the post like and putting like solely due to that factor alone like even while Sanjon will be falling backward like Sanjon not like even though at like the edge of like the tower still Sanjon like only falling backward and in the that resulting in like what Sanjon has as well as that's the game candidate who will be who held on to like Sanjon but being only safe at that point of like the scenario even after the forest like the scenario that I'm like so like so like at that point I'm looking for like two for the scenarios like I'm considering at that point that time would be so short like I'm looking like it would be like most likely 15 seconds alone remaining at that point is like the scenario that I'm so like at that point like once like Sanjon would be falling backward like I'm and like that way Sanjon and like the being safe as well as like being like holding on to Sanjon being safe but like at that point like Sanjon totally uh, and then the race Sanjon like totally like showing to like to like the country's to game candidate who alone will be still holding on to like Sanjon so like I'm seeing like the weapon like him getting clear and him totally and Sanjon at that point was shouting out to him to like to let go of like Sanjon so like at that point he's totally getting scared and like him totally seeing like the weapon totally getting scared and him totally getting up and I was wondering like at that point for like multiple opportunities, either like him totally seeing like the weapon like that's being candidate like getting scared and like him quickly getting up and like at that point like him totally tripping in like that sudden shock of like that confused being candidate and suddenly seeing that on a different weapon like in like on your like up to like him getting scared and him quickly letting go of like Sanjon and him quickly getting up and trying to move himself away from like Sanjon but like I'm like the shape of like the tower is like triangle like right now because so like due to it being triangle shape like since the moment he would be actively getting up and moving away from the triangle of the like him probably tripping and falling and getting eliminated like one possible scenario that I'm able to right. The other possible scenarios for like him sort of quickly seeing the weapon in that kind of second like him quickly getting scared and quickly getting up and quickly stepping away from that triangle and like at that point I'm the different like only like 5 seconds maybe by that maybe remaining at that point. So like was an arc that happened. So like at that point, like then the guy that without even saying a single word like quickly. The moment he would be getting up in that couple like him getting that unexpected strike from like the pole by the Indian guy. And like that way like the Indian guy eliminating that switching candidate who would have until then like head on to like Sanjay. It was like the other possible scenario that I'm like the third possible scenario that I'm bringing for like once like due to the like pulling of like Sangyong, I can feel like pull Sangyong to like the center of like the triangle tower like due to that pulling on both sides being in such with such effort and intensity like I was feeling like one when the sun and the like Sangyong will be like using it like weapon and detaching like that force tied on to like the waist like that thing and it like around the member swords and the like sword it is like Sangyong being by then like being pulled from to that inverting to that triangle platform and like even by the Sanjon as well as like that single swinging candidate moving right holding on to like Sanjon even after the detachment I'm definitely to that tight pulling like both sides like falling backward on just two sides of like the scenario that I get like Sanjon being pulled inward uh, until that point, like I'm sorry, like even after the detachment of like the whole like Sanjon along with like the along with that industry again like holding on to like Sanjon like even after that for like them being safe, but like while like the remaining football candidates like except for like the Jitan guy like the remaining except for like the Jitan guy and Sanjon and that single football candidate like the remaining football candidates were all lined up and basically in like a line were like that absolute strength were like pulling Sanjon like and so once like Sanjon will be like detaching that form like like jump or like totally falling backwards to the point where like the speaking candidate at like the further farthest end of like the last position of that line that they were pulling like him around like totally falling out of like the uh, sub triangle platform is like the scenario that I'm making. Like, yet like him still holding on to like even by all of the majority of the shooting candidates will be falling backward and onto like the platform like that single shooting candidate alone like falling outside of like the platform yet like hanging on to that whole like the scenario that I'm looking for right and like so and that and at that point I was for like so related to that single shooting and like hanging on to like that so outside of like that triangle platform and the remaining candidates being pulled towards that edge of like the triangle platform. So like at that point, I'm looking like definitely that Indian candidate in like the second half position getting focused gap and like probably letting go of like the group. Uh, and like that way, like that Syrian candidate who was like hanging on to like the boat at like the first up and like getting eliminated. Like the other person scenario that I was going to bring him up for. So yes, so like the name of friends right now is for like the baby of mind that dialogue of like when you don't die would be such an absolute threat internet for like something that you remember brain because like what then the guy would be meaning while saying that while staring straight into that something I really companies that basically that once like even if that someone survives and basically wins like the like ways to boost it. Like NG Coin guy definitely would be coming out from like at that point itself like it's trying to hand over like the baby to like the NG Coin guy. Then like the NG Coin guy will be definitely not creating to like eliminate the Sangyon and take the baby by force. Will be along the lines of like a threat that might be then the Coin guy will be insinuating through that dialogue that to Sangyon that like the baby just might right now it's definitely not very much. So yeah, like I'm throwing this dialogue of like the Indian guy, which like the Indian guy might have maybe in an emotional manner might have said out that I'm throwing that I'm throwing like so we're getting in like that dialogue that very hard on like the Indian guy itself is like on all sorts of directions, the minimal range, all sorts of directions, the minimal range. But more like I'm looking like the remaining Syrian candidates like I'm looking like them probably now them subject them having realized that like maybe when I pull that the Indian guy like I'm sure like them totally using that information to like definitely right from this point on itself to like blackmail like individual that the scenario that I'm that as well as like definitely Sandron as well. I'm going to like definitely I'm going to Sandron might have seen like the individual guy throughout like Sandron's journey like the 2024 years like I'm going definitely Sandron might have seen like the individual guy interacting with like Jeremy Hello. It's definitely my friend. Yeah, like Sandron might have never maybe might have never realized that like the baby actually belongs to like the biological father is like the nuclear that it's definitely not the Anderson. So like actually number bring that but like the nuclear guy like died of like a threat to that Sanjay that is definitely not that like the baby is my like definitely Sanjay a lot of like memories will be rushing into like Sanjay. Sanjay right now would be probably connecting all the dots and like seeing and think of everything that has happened so far, all the way to like Junkies like elimination with like the first game and everything. So like at that point I'm going like I'm going to be shocked right now. It's like a scenario that I'm stupid. And Sanjon would be enraged at like Enjigon guy and like Sanjon will be shouting out to like Enjigon guy that like is while Sanjon had to like save the baby in like the first game like the Enjigon guy would have probably saved Junkie why didn't he would be along the lines and then embraced man of like a different like why like the Enjigon guy selfishly saved himself um and betrayed Junkie who left the studio would be definitely for like Sanjon and enraged Sanjon would be asking like the Enjigon guy which was like Sanjon even after like combating like the first game of like the first game was like totally willing with like even such short time remaining for like this game to be over as well as like with like jump of swinging like an even faster playing like the backline like Sanjon still was like totally willing to like go back to like solely to like stay Junkie and the backline like when the Enjigon guy was like not only standing there, but like in that experience had selfishly has betrayed Johnny and like selfishly saved himself and completed like the game by himself. And with that realization, number three would be causing that extreme of rage to like happen with the next one. Would be right now would be still remembering that shock of like basically the index Johnny definitely my frame and definitely something will be also saying that basically and like will be realizing that like so just like it around thinking around the lines that like might have been definitely due to like Janti knowing that then when I craft to well like the villain signature of the 21 guys that like Janti had like so Sangyo to like take care of her baby. So there are like Sangyo will be realizing and like maybe even shouting out to like the 21 guy that basically and like I'm looking at that point of view like the Indian guy really trying to like justify himself and like by telling Sangam that he is like the Indian guy in that again had tried to like save Janti then at that point like both like the Indian guy as well as like Janti could have got eliminated in like the fifth game and might have failed in like the fifth game and that way like they didn't define Janti no one would be along the lines of the like the Indian guy trying to like make the excuse and trying to like change Sandra's mind and like manipulate Sandra to like definitely remember the ambition. So So like at that point, I was like Sanjon like not saying anything back at all, and seriously in an enraged manner, given that serious stare to like the Indian guy, the very same stare that Sanjon had given to like David, in like my birthday emotion after like David's betrayal, like my birthday emotion. So at that point, I was praying like Sanjon telling, looking at staring and carefully at like the Indian guy and like Sanjon telling the Indian guy like basically so like that like then different guy wants like the baby, so like you can have like the baby. Would be along the lines like Sangon be telling and just like serious ways and like Sangon would be at that point will be about to undo like the tie of like that cloth that's like finding like the baby to Sangon like I'm definitely at that point like itself like I'm going like Sangon like you'll be doing this while staring at like 21 guy. So like at that point so the 21 guy fronting and telling Sangon like not to it like basically that like basically once like at that point like the Indian guy will be telling telling Sanjay that basically to for like Sanjay to like hold on to like the baby until like the 16th game is over and basically like they can work at the time and like the Indian guy can definitely guarantee like the safety of like Sanjay and like the baby and like they stick together and work together like they can win like the game would be along the lines of the like 21 guy would be desperately through all sorts of excuses would be trying to like convince Sanjay. But like I'm thinking at that point like definitely Sanjay probably calling out like 21 guy and by like the 21 guy that basically the 21 guy probably prioritize like his own safety and his own survival victory and that in getting like the money over his own game. To be along the lines like Sanjay at that point to be calling out that 21 guy at that point and Sanjay to be telling that as well will be telling like in an encouraged manner will be telling that 21 guy that he will be then we go and like probably want to just use Sanjay like basically until like the 60 game is over so that like the Indian guy could like really leave with like the money as well as like the will be along the lines like like Sanjay would be like the Indian guy is not willing to like give everything up and everything to like save like to protect the baby then like since like the Indian guy is not willing to do that like the baby belong to like Indian guys would be along the lines of that absolute enraged manner like I don't be shouting out to the Indian guy like this and that is like the scenario that and at that point I was going like the Indian guy glaring back in an enraged manner towards like Sanjana as well like the scenario that I'm observing. At that point, after like the Indian guy in an enraged manner, like they moving away from like Sanjon and they open towards like the remaining Indian candidate and they shouting out that basically that like the Indian guy is saying that like he has like decided that basically definitely like that like they need to like probably work together and like they need to eliminate Sanjon in like the third round of the would be along the line like then the one guy will be telling and like I'm the friend like then the one guy will be telling like a reason for like this like decision. Like and for the like when the guy would be telling the remaining school again, there is that basically they had to go through all this suffering and basically having to like play all the six good games like solely due to like Sanjon. Like at that point like then the guy is once again starting with like manipulation of like the remaining school game candidate and like by playing Sanjon for like all the suffering and all the six of like all the six good games that they had gone through. That basically is all being due to like Sanjon's like basically attempt to like basically protect and save all like the civilian candidates like which had begun from like under ideology and everything which had begun from like the very first red light green light civilian that it was solely due to that reason alone like it was only due to like Sandor and it's like ideology fake ideology that basically they all had to like undergo suffering and play all six students like if it were for like Sandor like the students would have been over even before like game and basically they could have totally left very few of the game candidates would have even made it to even like the fourth game that would be along the lines like the different guys just using and manipulating the and that then basically that by the time by the time they would have got up into like the fourth game itself like might have been a scenario where like there might have been only just like the exact number of student candidates that are present right now might have been like only number of student candidates who might have even made it to like the fourth game if it weren't for like Sangon. And at that point, like due to like the lack of like the numbers of like game problem in candidates, like the person running like, game would have probably ended like the game from like the post game itself. And if that had happened, then we think they could all have left with like the reward money. If and like after like the post game itself without having to like go through and playing like as well as right now like begin. And would be along the lines of the Indian guy who is saying and like putting all the blame onto like Sanjon for all their suffering and like the Indian guy who was telling experiments again that like that about like how to see the fake like the ideology of like Sanjon that is the Sanjon and he eliminated like another Squid Game candidate in order to that win like the fourth Squid Game and basically like and this very same person Sanjon was like the one preaching to all of them about like saving everyone throughout like the journey of like the 2024 Game along the lines of like that in Bitcoin that was also explained like Sanjon, putting all the blame onto like Sanjon. And I'm looking at that point like that couldn't like frustrated and raised towards like Sanjon, which would be totally important within like the whole man's swinging candidate as well as like that winner six strong swinging candidate as well. Uh, which might have been the Philip problem like that will be all coming out and like they're all pointing out as well and will be that point will be getting free. That point set like empathy like the program swinging candidate as well as like the response to gain benefit to gain candidate as well to be totally like would be able to like resonate with like the thing that like then people guy will be saying and will be like that way like saying that like then will be feeling that like then feel of like the situation and everything is all will feel like Sunday and Santon I don't get along the lines of about me and that then feeling. So I'm the thing like at that point, like the Indian guy, probably finishing it off by telling them that basically, so it's only fair that basically in like the next and third and final round, in like third hour, in like the games that like they all work together to ensure that like Sanjo get eliminated, so that like to target Sanjo later and to ensure that like Sanjo get eliminated, so that like the Indian guy will get back to like the so that's like so that like they can all. Go back to the all the award money and after like getting all of the revenge on like Smash or the along the lines and the different actions when guys would be to stick things up and basically putting that entire blame on like Sanjon and rapidly creating that within like the entire face of the remaining speaking candidate all them towards like and having all that rage towards like Sanjon. At that point it's like scenario that I'm going to bring so like something I was remembering like right now it's like the second hour thing over like I'm saying like on like the platform connecting like second and third hour will be that during like I'm just saying like at that point that comes like if they the scenario to be like on the like scenario to be like then you can like straight away running through that platform doing like the third hour and should be picking up like the port at that point is like the scenario that I was doing and that so like that, I want to my business and the topic ring like the third tower like and that the engine guy to be like the first close that so to like third tower and will be taking up like the board and I'm looking like the remaining civilian candidates will be walking towards like the third tower and Sanjon number different like Sanjon along with lecture David will be like the last two lecture of to like the third tower and that's like Sanjon and before like Sanjon will be stepping about the step towards like the third tower like I'm looking like the engine guy with like the pole that only stopping Sanjon from like entering into the third tower, like the scenario variable. That way, like Sanjon is while holding on to like the baby standing on that narrow platform, like scenario variable. And at that point, said like then the guy would be like telling like the minister candidates to like cross like the button to like start like the game in like third tower. So like at that point, I was very like one of the speaking candidates like pressing the button and basically the timer once again starting and I'm looking at that point, so like the platform, like totally going back in slowly, like the scenario parameter, right? So like Sandra at that point will be standing in that narrow platform that will be totally like moving inward that towards like the tower like the scenario that will be going. So at that point, I'm looking like Sanjong would be totally with that kind of still I'm looking like Sanjong not being initially I'm looking at Sanjong being scared. Yet like I'm feeling like Sanjong would be like looking at like the that and like Sanjong would be so able to like see that absolute fear within like the when guys face even by like the platform would be reducing and going inward with like Sanjong by holding on to like a baby would be forced to like stay on like that platform. So like I'm looking yet like I'm looking at that point Sanjong looked like a serious face like and like, staring at like the guy and like then you can guide the threatening Sanjong to give the baby up to that then you can guide and that then you can guide so it's like a big space will be telling Sanjong that like to take good care of the baby and basically for like Sanjong to like give up like the baby and definitely I'm threatening like Sanjong at that point telling the Indian guy that basically that the baby is mine to get up the line like Sanjong will be telling to like the guy that that Indian guy doesn't deserves like the baby and like Janvi was like totally right with the lines like I'm like Sanjo with like a scene space sheet of back in like the and like I'm thinking that as like the platform would be almost like fully gone, like I'm putting like still Sanjon, really trying to get back into like the tower and like Sanjon still like the daily last like a like staying on that platform just like the scenario that I'm putting. But like at that point like in this when I was only from being like fear and like that way last second like the platform could do almost about being fully gone like a new guy grabbing hold on like Sanjon and so he pulling with that like at this point pulling Sanjon into like the tower. Just like the scenario that way Sanjot as well as like the very like entering that how that is not variable. And at that point itself I'm looking like then because like totally like using all of its strength to like separate that Sanjot from that game with like scenario that I'm looking at it. And I'm looking Sanjot only giving it just as you're taking to like prevent like then because like from being able to do that like Sanjot would be at that point that using like the weapon. And I'm looking like with that and because like get injured and like from that point, like the Syrian candidates as well would be like when raised to end up trying like separate Sanjon from like the lady from like from like Sanjon with his like weapon would be like basically driving them attacking all the women Syrian candidates like using like the whole of like the scenario that I'm doing and like those are the enough probably like an like then like uh for me eliminating one by one like eliminating like the remaining Syrian candidates with that and like even like the almost candidates like the scenario that I'm doing and so India was like it being that strong Indian candidate, that would be like remain. So like I'm talking as like Guy will be using that whole like eliminate as well like that was quite and class like I'm talking like a strong speaking candidate like managing like to like to like get like support away from like the individual guy as well as like that whole class like I'm like support totally falling off like the third tower like scenario that I'm doing. And then like I'm talking like that absolute fight happening between like the face-to-face fight, one fight happening between like the Indigo and guy as well as like the yeah between like the Indigo and guy as well as like the strong Indigo candidates like Naro and and in that fight like I'm talking like initially like that strong to begin and then like early or like the and him taking a lot of injuries but like I'm talking like eventually at like 20 seconds 10 seconds around like 20 15 seconds almost during like finding managing to like pop up like that strong to be candidate and like that strong to be candidate that we like scenario that I'm taking over the right. And then I'm looking at while 10 seconds alone with the remaining like I'm looking like and then going die would be standing to be just like in the gun die and up to the really that is where like that's how and like then fairly injured and going die because we walking towards like Sanjon and the really and I'm still Sanjon at like the edge of like the top of the holding on to like the really while repeating like the words that like the baby that belongs to like Sanjay, like the scenarios that I'm looking over like. And I was like at that point like the 21 guy probably walking towards like Sanjay and he's me telling that sorry to like Sanjay and basically telling Sanjay that like Sanjay is right that like the baby belongs to like Sanjay and like the 21 guy was like undeserving of like the baby and all that. And I was feeling like that way like the Indian guy saying this and basically probably and I was from that point on for like the remaining of like the Squid Game in like the third tower like and the next one will be going through such an absolute that struggle to ensure that the protection of like the baby with like the scenario that I'm doing and in that process like I'm doing like Sanjong like ensuring the safety of like the baby would be going Sanjong himself would be going through all sorts of like injuries like the scenario that I'm looking and that definitely Sanjong taking a whole lot of injuries and I'm looking like even like when Jikon guy, not only the remaining Indian candidate, but like when Jikon guy to be inflicting a lot of injuries something like that. But like I'm looking like literally after a while, after a point in that game, like in that when Jikon totally totally having that realization has to like how badly, how much like Sanjon is like putting in that effort to like protect like the Jikon guy baby and maybe how little like the Jikon guy was willing to like to protect to respond this being focused on the Indian along the lines of something that has to react from realization would be happening for like when you can like during like the stadiums in like the final hours like the scenario midway like the scenario for different. And I'm preparing that at that point, like then the guy will be totally feeling that basically finally that selflessness happening to like the individual guy, and like the different guy will be totally feeling would be remembering like the words of like junkie totally wanting and not letting the guy to like take care of the baby on the and like junkie is that elimination that became that then that like betrayal of junkie and all that like I'm bring all that memory finally rushing into like the guy and finally that extreme game that only like happening to that the individual guy and basically that then you can get find that way ending up into that for acceptance that basically Sanjong will be a way that person for that the individual guy that separating to grow up with the along from the like then the guy in like the third in like the third tower like in like we finally coming to like a realization to like find for the remaining billion candidates to be totally focused on like Sanjong and for making the Sanjong like at that point finally that when the guy totally in an enraged manner like shouting out and at that point like then you can like saying this and then the like as like 2 seconds would alone will be remaining like and like then we can like walking towards like the edge and I'm looking like that way like the individual guy getting eliminated like in the scenario that I'm looking and like that way like Sandra and like the baby ending up being like the winner of like the 2024 begins like in the scenario that I'm looking and that way like at that point like simply even if it was such a close call, still I'm like at that point, info they will be absolutely pleased that with me, even though Sanjon had rejected like info like and help to like totally change Sanjon and to totally put like info plan which attended the will be that lead to like change Sanjon and to fully change Sanjon and to have like Sanjon like around like this weekend 2025. So like even though Sanjon rejected uh, info like help to eliminate like the remaining thinking and it is like amazing skill. So like info of that and like that way won't have like Sandrock and like to be able to end up becoming like the winner of the particular in the work to games like skill. Even if through Sandrock like rejection still that's the fact that like at that point from like the scenario being like Sandrock and like the various and like the winner of the games at that point I'm the super like info get all big piece and like info at that point only think of like somehow manipulating Sandrock and getting Sandrock to lack of lead around like the to change its mind and to have like Sanjo around like siblings confronted by so like that in like like hope would be like once again like like Sanjo will be like spin off like Sanjo like maybe would be become like showing up like when the game like I'm like was only showing up once again showing up in front of like Sanjo and I'm just like info would be totally attempting the convenient would be totally attempting to like once again manipulate and change Sanjo and about different like maybe it would be during those times that I mean like finally maybe like Janko would be making it to like either Janko would be making it to like the to that exact location or like I'm thinking that during Janko in Federation I'm looking at not later the number of like Janko getting eliminated but like eventually Janko getting captured and put into like an kind of like info then before that finding out about like just like for example like info giving the order to like put John Hope into like in some kind of like video get like I'm doing like I want like by the time like Sandro will be along with like the baby will be winning like certain games of games like by then that as like info would be like trying to like manipulate Sandro like at that point maybe like info getting like the show the man info getting like the show right with that Janko and like Janko they getting free and like like Janko and then the huge battalion of like police of like showing up to like the exact location were like in Sanjon and like the front man in Sanjon effectively and the like info of anything like the VIPs like basically being brought into like an after kind of like it's like going to scenario or like the other scenario that I'm looking at okay, so that you know, preemption right now at for like extremely realistic like LunchBox like plans like performance the began like that probably will be that very hard. It's like what scenario that I'm talking about. Like I'm putting like a scenario saying like that for being candidate to all like the injuries, extreme injuries like like by the time they will be taking it towards like the circle tower like and will be about to press like the button like and like just at like the very last second like, right before they will be pressing this the button like and showing it that uh, that bad injured to gain candidate like and that would be succumbing to that injury that would be getting eliminated like just before like them pressing like the button for like the timer in like the third. circle tower selecting the scenario that I'm looking at. So at that point, I'm considering like sense of the that dominant looking candidate like and that strong benefits will be candidate deciding to like target another one comes to as like the next LunchBox is selecting the scenario that I'm looking at. So that while the spawn fight and collision will be happening between the and I'm referring that while this like and I'm referring that while the sport fight will be happening like between like most likely that the Indian guy will be taking advantage of like that distracted state of like first presidency candidate to like but that whole like in like Indian guy which so that whole like important like Indian guy like by all the presidency candidate in like third tower at that point would be distracted and fighting some pieces of like Indian guy using like the whole that would be most likely ending up eliminating all of the is like single scenario that I think about. So that like at that point it will be just like sung out like the way and like then like you know that will be person in like that third hour. It's like the scenario that I'm still like I'm doing that they won't be declared up like the middle still I'm like the inability declared up like the timer will be still going on. It's like in the scenario that I'm remembering. And from that point is when I'm looking for like the whole like interaction like that the first attempt of like the even like to like the convince Sanjay to like to the baby to like the going guy will be happening and I'm also like another possible scenario where like Sanjay the even the target refuses to like give up like the baby no matter how much like the become like okay attempting to like confuse and convince Sanjay to like give up the baby like the scenario in that way time running out to the point of like my while 20 seconds alone like will be remaining like or like 30 seconds alone will be remaining like like when guy getting the spread and like finding the end zone guy if like villain going to like the point of like every like once like then the gun guy at that point would be getting the spread to the point of like trying to like eliminate Sanjon at that point of like person so that like then for like that way like then the gun guy prioritizing influence alone like about everything at that point and at that time they wrote down on like scenarios that I mean like for like insert alone to like win like the civilian like the scenario and that way like I'm maybe like the MG gun guy that way trying to like attack and like to eliminate Sanjon like and then the gun guy attempting that like filling the scenario that I mean right and like Sanjon is finding his way into like only escaping like that sort of like then the gun guy and I was like then the gun guy repeatedly trying to like using the pole and everything and trying to like attack Sanjay and I'm looking maybe by then like the pole and position that when you can like maybe using the pole so like about that so like still I'm like that's part of eventually protecting and like by also be happening like when you don't die would be forced to like continue with the like that screens of from the like scenario that I'm really so that but like eventually that screens of like don't really like eventually there is something in like then you don't guy totally breaking down at like after a certain point and basically would be that kid will be that kid feeling within like then you can guy will be suffering and basically will be too much for like and then you can guy at that point that kind that like then you can guy for me that giving up and basically giving up from trying to like eliminate Sanjay that way like then just like getting eliminated and without like climbing the out like scenario like then when guy just like the heads and like that way then you can guys getting eliminated like other players in the scenario that I'm bring. Okay, so like the Demon Prevention right now, so like of complete and flat on top of like the second hour right now. So the current people we are sitting in on the current of the thing like is we just eventually once like the class will be over like it will be just all the remaining three candidates getting eliminated and also like to be like just like the Sanyo as well as like Benson guy and like the baby kind of starting to remain at that point of like scenario that I'm right and them three will be moving to like the third separate how exact the scenario in the scenario that is the and my